Welcome to the May 2021 VMware TAM Customer Webinar. This webinar is organized by the VMware TAM organization to provide our customers the opportunity to hear great content and interact directly with great speakers with the goal of making sure that you're getting full benefit from your software. Please make use of the Q&A feature to ask any questions, and if your question doesn't get addressed today, be sure and reach out to your TAM, ask them for a follow-up. Before we get into today's content, just a couple of basic announcements. Our next TAM Customer Webinar will be on June 10th with Bob Plankers, and he'll be talking about why Vsphere 7 and Vsphere 7 with Tanzu are the best versions of Vsphere yet. So be sure and catch that session. He always does a great job. If you have any questions during today's webinar, please use the Q&A feature of Zoom, and we will address them during the webinar. At the end of today's session, you will be prompted to fill out a simple 2-question survey related to the value you receive from this session and any topic suggestions for future sessions. Your completion of this survey is a very valuable gift back to us. We'd greatly appreciate it. In fact, next month's session on Vsphere 7 is a direct result of your suggestions in the past couple of surveys. Lastly, this webinar is being recorded, and your TAM can make the recording available to you after the session. And then after a few months, the recording does become publicly available on the VMware TAM Services YouTube channel. Be sure and subscribe to that channel if you don't already. So that brings us to today's speaker and topic. Julie Roman spent the first 8 years of her career with VMware in the TAM organization before transitioning to technical marketing a couple of years ago. The majority of her focus is to highlight a product that gets way less attention than it deserves, the vRealize Log Insight. Hopefully you come away from today's session with a new enthusiasm for what Log Insight can do for you and feeling more equipped to use it to solve problems in your business. Julie, thanks so much for joining us today, and the stage is yours. So Julie, you're on, there you go. We'll go again.
Hey everybody, for this session, I'm actually going to cover the on-prem version of Log Insight, but I think Andy had some survey questions for you just to find out what version you're using, because I can, we can swap kind of between the two if you like. For this presentation, I'm going to cover architecture, so we're doing on-prem. Obviously with the cloud version, there's not that infrastructure, there's just a proxy, so please let us know which one you like. With that, I'm going to keep going and you guys can interrupt when the survey is complete.
Okay.
So the presentation is going to cover some of the new features that we just released in Log Insight 8.4, which was released last month, in the middle of last month. And then we'll talk about the architecture and go over interactive analytics, some log management features and administration. And I'll also be doing a demo. So if during the presentation, there's specific things you want to see that are important for your environment, just please let me know and I can make sure I cover that during the demo. As I mentioned, we released a lot of new features with our 8.4 release. It was our biggest release in quite some time. We added a new log sources page. If you're familiar with the cloud version, we have detailed instructions on how to configure your logs to send to Log Insight Cloud. And so now we're bringing that into the on-prem release, and we're starting with containers. We also added details for configuring FluentD. So that's not necessarily specific to containers, but configuring it for other applications as well. We have the log masking, which if you have sensitive information for whatever reason coming through in your logs, you can actually mask that information so it's not viewable. And we also have log filtering. So this enables us to drop specific log messages. So if you have a particularly chatty log in your environment that's using up storage space, we can actually filter that out if it's unnecessary. And then with this release, we also had a bunch of updates to content packs. Notice the labeling of some of the content packs aren't as intuitive as you'd expect. So like the Vsphere 7 content pack is actually labeled version 8.4 because it was released with the 8.4. So we might relabel that in the future, but that is for Vsphere 7. And we've just gone through and updated a lot of the content packs for bug fixes and enhancements. And then we added a new log management area where we have previously, if you're familiar with the product, we had multiple locations to go for like archiving and forwarding. We brought those all into the same page. We've added custom webhooks. So we have out of the box configurations for PagerDuty and Slack, but you can also do your own webhooks. Previously, you had to use a shim server, so now it's built into the platform. We changed the way we manage alerts so that it's by subscription, and what this does is duplicate alerts. So if I want an alert and Andy wants an alert, we're not recreating that so that we can both get that information. We just add to the existing alert, and then we added version 1.0 of the vRealize sizer, which is a web sizer versus the Excel spreadsheet that we used to use. So simplifying that for you. But with that, let's get into the log insight architecture.
Hey, Julie, I think we've got some results here, so we could just get an idea of who our audience is.
Oh, perfect.
Right? So it looks like the majority, almost 80% use log insight today of the people that are in the webinar, and the large majority are using on-prem, 98% using on-prem.
Okay, right. Well, I'm glad that I chose to go that route then.
Yeah, very good.
Like I said, if you do have any questions about how they differ or anything, let me know and I can cover that if people are. So the basic architecture of Log Insight is we have a cluster of nodes. We have one primary node that kind of is the coordinator between all the other nodes. And you can scale that out to 18 nodes. It's using an internal load balancer. We don't support any third-party load balancers with Log Insight. You can send via syslog. Via 514, you can do secure syslog. If you want to use certificates, we can also use the ingestion API, and that is actually the Log Insight agent. So you can do that over HTTP or HTTPS. That does require an agent installed into the guest OS, and we support Linux and Windows platforms. And that would be where you'd be sending anything that you're not using syslog would either use the Log Insight agent, or we can also use FluentD. It's not that those are fully supported and documented. If you have other methods of sending like Logstash or something, we have worked with that as well. And we have a lot of out-of-the-box content. So with that, you can have the detailed instructions on how to send like your SQL or whatever Windows logs you have. You also have the option to use selective forwarding. So we have a lot of customers that need security and incident logs. So if they need a SIM server for management and auditing, and you can selectively forward your logs from Log Insight so that you're not sending all of the non-security related events, thus hopefully saving you some money on the SIM side, since those services tend to be a little bit more expensive. And then we also support Nfs Archival. So if you need long-term archival for your logs, you can export those logs. And then if you did need to search a specific time frame, you could then re-import those into the platform. Looks like we do have 2 questions. Yes, I can definitely. So somebody is asking about moving from on-prem to cloud, and I'll go over that. And what are the worker node placement requirements and recommendations? And I'm going to get to that in just a minute, so I'll save that. And the stages of log processing. So when log messages come in, they're going to be evaluated. And so this is where it's going to have, hey, what message type is this? Do I need to mask the message? Do I need to filter it upon ingestion? Masking and filtering is done upon ingestion. So once you have that set, it will also have that filtered for forwarding. So if you have a forwarder configured and you're filtering out logs, those will not get forwarded. If you're masking logs to hide specific data, that will also be masked on forwarding. So your forwarded destination will not get that, but it's going to do some query evaluation. It will process whether there's extracted fields so that if there's important data in your log message, it's going to break that out into fields. Now, since the extractions happen after ingestion, one thing to note is masking and filtering is required that you use a static field or a tag. So I'll get into that a little bit more in the future or in the upcoming slides. But so anyways, it's going to evaluate the query and then it's going to store the log message. If you have archiving enabled, it will archive that log message. The way Log Insight works is you can have a maximum of 72 terabytes on your cluster. And once that storage fills up, it's going to overwrite the oldest buckets of logs. And buckets are 500 meg chunks. So once you reach the 97%, it's going to overwrite those logs. And a common question I get is, people always trying to get it below 97%, but by design, once it's been up and running for a while, it will always run at that 97% and overwrite logs as necessary. So you would set up a system alert, say you need to retain logs for 1 month. You wouldn't want to get notified if you are filling up storage faster than that rate, so you can address it and add more storage if necessary, because if you're not going to run out of space, if your retention policy is greater than you have storage, you're just going to get an alert because then it will be overwritten. This is the basic sizing guide. So an extra small deployment would be for a POC type activity. And then we have small, medium, large. We actually have extra large and extra large if you want to consider it that. Now, by default, the virtual appliance is deployed with 500 gigabytes of storage. If you do want to increase that, you can have up to a maximum of 4 terabytes per node. The maximum disk size is 2 terabytes. So ideally, if you did need the maximum per node, you would do two terabyte storage, and that just optimizes performance versus having like 8 500 gigs. So you know, if you have to add incrementally, that's fine. But for a fresh deployment, we recommend that you size storage as large as possible, which is 2 terabytes in our case. And then as you get to the extra large nodes where you'd need more, you'd be adding CPUs and RAM. We can't add any more storage. So 72 terabytes is the max with the 18 nodes deployed. But the extra large nodes are for query performance. And we noticed that customers who were constantly, you know, doing queries throughout the day, really active in dashboards, searching long time frames, so over 24 hours of logs, they needed more performance. And that is where the extra large nodes, the over 32 gigabytes comes in if you do need that, but it doesn't give you any more space. It's all about performance. And you'll see the IOPS listed there for how many ingestions per second that you can have. And again, on the extra large, it is the same as the large for that reason, because it's all about performance. Let's see. And I know the worker node placement recommendations, let me see, I'm going to get to that in 1 second. The vRealize sizer is new. We have a basic sizing calculator for the first release, so you can calculate based on the amount of storage that you require to retain your logs for a given period of time. And then you can actually, it'll have the output for your storage space. But if you want to do events per second, you can also do that based on your EPS, and it will provide that information that way as well. So cluster prerequisites, there's a minimum of 3 nodes per cluster. Now we do recommend 4, and that is because Cassandra database handles that a little bit more gracefully. If you only have 3 nodes, it takes a little bit longer for the Cassandra database to come up, but minimum is 3, that's all that's required. And all nodes must be in the same data center. They have to be on the same layer 2 network. They have to be exactly the same size, but understand that during an upgrade where you need to add more RAM or storage, they can be dissimilar for that period of time while you're rolling through and upgrading those settings. They all must use the same SSL certificate, and there's time synchronization. Best practice would be to have your nodes ideally in a management cluster, and some of our customers have multiple management clusters, so that allows them to split up the nodes between the two clusters. We would want them to be ideally in the same vCenter. They don't have to be. We just want to make sure that they're on the same layer 2 network, and there's not any latency, because that could affect internode communication. And we do recommend you don't oversubscribe in your management cluster, so that would be the same for a login site. You want to make sure that you're not allocating more RAM and CPU than the cluster can actually back. So great. Okay, so that answered that question. So when you're deploying it, you would select the size, extra small, small, medium, large. That's going to give you the CPU and RAM configuration. As I mentioned, by default, it's going to have 500 gigs of storage. If you want, you can just increase that 500 gigs to 2 terabytes before you power the appliance on. We do recommend that you use Eager Zero Disk whenever possible for maximum performance. We do have customers that just have thin provisions across the way and it works fine, but we also have a lot of customers who really want to get every possible optimization in there, and in that case, we recommend Eager Zero. We have currently, and you can only have 2 DNF servers listed. If you have more than 2, then it will not, DNS won't work. So there will likely be a fix for that coming soon. And if that is a priority for you, if you just want to let me know so I can add your company information to our request for enhancement on that. And we do recommend that you do set affinity rules so that you don't have more than 1 node per host. Again, that's ideal situation. And that way, if you do have a host go down, you're only losing 1 login site node. And to join additional nodes to a cluster, you just simply connect to the primary node that you've deployed. You can also orchestrate some of that per API if you are a customer that has multiple login site deployments. That can come in handy. Configuring load balancing is really easy. We do recommend that everyone uses a load balancer IP, and that way your syslog and login site agents all have redundancy. You can add multiple virtual IPs. So say you have your physical infrastructure, maybe you want to set that apart from your virtual infrastructure. You can set those to go to 1 IP. That also gives you the ability to specify tags on those logs, which is helpful if you are using any of the log management features, because you will be able to filter on those tags. If you're using NSX, there's a requirement that you need the enable IP discovery option disabled. Let's see. So John is asking about the sizing calculator. It actually goes up to 8.4. I'll make sure that's updated. That was probably an older screenshot. But yes, it's valid for 8.4. Nothing has changed with sizing since 8.2. And do you recommend to deploy these nodes on a Vsan cluster data store? Yeah, that's perfectly fine. If you're doing a Vsan data store, you can choose the option for no redundancy, or you can choose redundancy, because the one thing with login site is you have, if you lose a node, you lose the data on that node because the data is not redundant. So for performance reasons, you might want to have it set so that there is no redundancy on Vsan. But if you're concerned about failure, then we would want redundancy. But understand that it's going to take up a lot more space, but we fully support it. And that's actually what we use in our demo environment. Okay. Integration with Vsphere is pretty simple. You can come in here and add a vCenter server. You need to provide credentials with the requirements listed over there on the right-hand side. you can have, we support up to 15 vCenter servers per login site node. If you are maxing that out, there are sometimes some configuration timeout changes that we need to make, excuse me, on the vCenter side. So that's one thing to consider, and that would be when you're approaching that maximum of 15. The vRealize operation integration, you actually do require administrative permissions for this. You'll want to make sure that the target you set is the virtual IP for the entire cluster. Otherwise, you'll have issues when you try, sometimes we have customers that for whatever reason during setup, they expanded their cluster, or it's not pointed to the correct target. So make sure that's the virtual DNS name for your entire cluster. And this enables you to go from logs to the object in vRealize login site. We also, I think it was our 8.2 release, we added logs as metrics for vRealize operations. So you can detect anomalies in log count. If you see a huge spike in how many logs something is sending, you can note that in VROPS rather. Robert's asking in regard to Vsan deployment, are there any recommendations on storage policies? There would be some benefits in deduplication for logs. Obviously, there's a lot of redundant information. We don't have any specific criteria. You're able to use whichever your standard policy is, but definitely could benefit from dedupe. I would probably not enable compression because there's a performance impact on that. I'm not sure what it is offhand. I would have to talk to one of our Vsan experts, but we want to make sure that our search and query performance is as fast as possible. All right, we're going to, oops. So you don't need to log in every time the login side dashboards and VROPS anymore. So no, if you're logged in to login site and you click over on VROPS and you're not already logged in, you do get prompted for authentication if you're using VIDM, and I can show you that in the demo. So with dashboards, they're composed of several widgets. We have a couple different options during the dashboard, or a couple different dashboard types. So we have individual dashboards. So if I want to create things that are just for me, I would have those in my own personal dashboards. Typically with teams, though, if they have content that's usable, they'll want to share those with their team. And so then you have shared dashboards. And then we have content pack dashboards. And those are actually read-only dashboards that you can use. So if you do want to make modifications to them, update widgets, use filtering options, change the chart type or whatever, you would need to clone those to a separate dashboard. And then from there, you can make modifications and share those or leave those in your own personal space. Patrick's asking if vRealize and VROPS must have the same version. I would have to look completely at the interop, but I know that like 8.4 works with 8.3 for VROPS. The best practice is to have them on the same version, but with 8.4, nothing was substantially changed that would preclude you from upgrading if you're using VROPS 8.3, and I believe it would work on 8.2. I'd have to check though, so don't quote me on that. But the main thing is if we've made updates with the integration, that you would absolutely have to be on the same version, which we didn't have in 8.4. Sorry, I've got this screen up in my way. So we can edit a chart type in the dashboards. Or if it's a content pack dashboard I mentioned, we would clone that. And then we can also view the widget in interactive analytics. So that will open up the log query and give us the detailed log messages. And then we can also view the details So this is expanding the chart to show specifically what detail is provided in the widget. And this is important because if you're using Log Insight and you're not using vRealize operations, there are certain widgets that will not populate it, as is the case with this Vsphere error events by cluster. So there's two main widget types. There's a chart, which actually contains a visualization of the log messages, but we also have query widgets, and that's where it's going to have several queries as part of a widget, and then you would actually have to click play on them to find out if there's results. These are nice if you have, if like you want a small number of dashboards, because you're not actually running the query on the back end unless you click on play. So if you versus having a ton of widgets on a dashboard, like you probably wouldn't want 20 widgets on a dashboard because it's just going to impact the load time because it's running all those queries on the back end. So these multi-query widgets are nice when you just want to have a lot of information displayed back, and you would just hit play on the relevant queries. And then obviously if it has results, you'll be able to view the relevant log messages. Otherwise, it'll let you know there's no log messages meeting that criteria. So we have, this is actually just a standard chart. And then on the right-hand side, the reason you see that legend is because we're grouping by a specific, in this case, a specific fault type. So if you don't see a legend on there, that's because we're just searching for log messages and we're not grouping it by a specific field. And then I already explained the multi-widget functionality. So using dashboards, we have the content bag dashboards where you can just go in and select a specific dashboard. We also have filter options. So if I want to filter based on a specific data center, like I'm doing in this visualization, I can just see all of the events for that specific data center using the prefix. I could also add additional filters. We can also adjust the time frame. By default, these should be set to 5 minutes. And then you can obviously extend the time frame. The longer time frame you're searching, like if you put this out to 7 days, it's going to take a lot longer to populate for obvious reasons. It's searching a lot more data. And then you can also share a dashboard URL. So if I want somebody who doesn't have access to the system to view this dashboard, I can send them the link and they will have unauthenticated access. But the key thing to note here is it's only relevant for the time period that I'm searching. They won't have live access to change that, and that is by design. And then you can also view it in presentation. So like if you were doing, maybe you have a knock call where you're going over status or something, you could have it more in a PowerPoint presentation type view. If you want to share a URL dashboard, you would just click on the link and then you can choose to have it expire after a certain amount of time, or you can have it indefinitely, and then you would share that out. And notice that these shared dashboards, they don't have any time, they can't make any adjustments, they're only seeing the data as it was when you ran the dashboard. And then if you shared something by mistake or you want to extend the time, if you're an administrator of the system, you can come in and make modifications to those URL sharing, or you can remove them if you want to revoke access. Let's see. Remco is asking, is there any easy way to figure out if your Log Insight cluster is sized too small? Yeah, it would just be whatever the CPU and RAM. So going back a few slides, I don't know if, I'm not going to go all the way back there actually, but if it has that same CPU and RAM, then it would be a small if it matches up with that specification. Julie,
what about, is there a way to figure out if our Log Insight cluster is undersized?
Yes, in the administration detail, which is coming up here, you'll be able to see how many events per second you're receiving per node. And so if you're exceeding the maximum events per second, then you would be undersized. And you would probably see this in System Monitor where it's showing that it's taxed performance-wise.
Okay, I think that may have been kind of the question that was
Gotcha.
there.
Is it still the case that when an alert query or et cetera is created by a user that it is deleted if the user account is removed? No, that's actually fixed with the 8.4 release. They're moving to a system-owned model so that you won't lose those alerts in addition to deduplication. So if you're on 8.4, that has been resolved. Can I share the interactive search results as well? Yes, I'll show you that. And then how many days of retention at the current rate? You'll get notifications if you have system alerts enabled when you're reaching the max, when you're approaching 97% of space. So it'll tell you, you know, at the current rate, you have 6 days of retention. And then if that changes, you'll get in another alert, and it's all based on what you have set in the system configuration. And I can show you that as well. So does it show how many days of retention at the current rate? It's a notification. I don't believe it shows you that in the UI. It's under system alerts. Okay, so if we go over interactive analytics is where we're using machine learning to cluster similar event types together. This is really helpful to see if there's specific trends that are coming in the environment at a high rate. It can help you detect issues. It can also help you determine maybe you're getting a lot of event types that you don't need. And now with filtering, we can actually filter those out. And this is automated. So when you see these blue fields, when you see these blue fields, that's all something that's learned that all those log messages contain that same field. So they're all grouped together. You know, the individual information of those fields can vary. So if it's like a username's in there, it could be a different user, but all those logs are typed the same. So if we come in here, this is the unique events found during this specific time range. And then it'll show you the overall count of events for that message. Again, that's based on whatever your search filter is. So 5 minutes, an hour, 24 hours, depending on what you have. And then it'll tell you the number of event types. So those are unique event types that are present in the time period that you searched. And then each field in blue, as I mentioned, is a learned smart field. So all of the log messages within that grouping have that field. If we look into our interactive analytics search, we have several different search options. We can do, you know, contains, does not contain. Actually, I think, hold on, I lost my question in a questions Q&A windows.
I kept the first two there just so that you mentioned during the demo you were going to touch on them.
Got it. Let's see how
and then
on time. Maybe I should, I'm going to probably finish up interactive analytics and then I'll do the demo for administration, if that works.
Sure. That third one is related to the days of retention, just suggesting that that be more visible in the, like an admin.
Yeah, so like a feature request for that.
Gotcha.
And then the tracing messages related to the same transaction across vRealize automation and orchestrator. I don't have a good answer for you on that one, but I can take that as feedback. All right, so let's walk through what we have in interactive analytics. We have, again, you can set the filter criteria. You would adjust the time range. Again, it's going to default to 5 minutes, and 5 minutes is obviously not a ton of time. If you're searching for something that happened an hour ago, you'd want to obviously update that. And then you can also view the count of events or unique count of events. So if you're just doing a count of events, it's just going to say, have a number like, hey, there were 8 log messages of these type, or there was 8 unique host names in these log messages. And then group by is really important. I think a lot of people kind of ignore this feature, but it's really helpful to see what kind of data is in your log message. So you could group it by host name or app name. Here we're grouping by the app name, so we can view all of the different apps that fall under NSX, and this can help us with further refining log filters and searches. We can also add multiple filters. So if you want to filter on app name and filter on host name, starts with, you can continue to build that out. Some of our content packs, you'll notice, have 7 different filters on there. And then you can filter by events like this or not like this. That's really helpful if you're getting, if you do a search and all of the first, 10 log messages are all exactly the same, but they're not what you want, you just filter those out. Or you want to view events like that, and then you can open that information in Operations Manager. If you don't see that option, but you do have integration, it means that specific object that you're looking at does not have a corresponding VROPS object ID. And then you can favorite the query for easy recall. You can also add that query to the dashboard. You can create an alert based on that query. And then you can also export the log data. So you can do 20,000 log messages and just export to like CSV. Otherwise, if you're over 20,000 messages, you do need to export to NFS. And I realized I misspoke. You cannot share the detail of interactive analytics, but you can export those specific log messages. So if you want your security team to have access to those log messages, you could do a filter and then export those and send them like a CSV file. Okay. And then the calculate based on a numeric function. This does obviously require that something is classified as a number. So in an extracted field, the regular expression used would have to signify that that's a number. And then you can do calculations. So we could do sum or average for things that are numeric values. So if you wanted to know like the entire payload, or if you wanted to know the total size of like web page hits over a specific time frame, instead of just seeing the individual log messages, you could do that. And then if you want to extract fields, you can simply highlight the log message, the data in the log message that you want to extract. And by highlighting it, it's going to pop up whether you want to filter it or extract a field. Now, with any common products or anything with a content pack, you're probably not going to need to extract fields because we should have most of that covered. But there are cases where you might have in-house applications, or you might have something for whatever reason isn't extracted. You can certainly do that. And what that's going to do is it's going to give you the information on what it feels is the appropriate regular expression. In this case, it knows that it's an IP address, so it's populated that correctly. It's also giving some pre and post context. Obviously, it's not every IP address that I want to have this field. So then I just made some modifications to this because the RPC port might change, and so that's not a static value. So I removed the 580 and just left the colon there, and that extracted that field. Once it's extracted, I'm able to see the details of the, in this case, it was an open cart IP address. So it's showing me the server that the client IP address, and there are 4 unique clients in that log data. And then for alerts, there is an option if you want to enable content pack alerts or alerts that have already been created. You can manage alerts from interactive analytics. You can also manage alerts if you're an administrator, but this would be a method for users who aren't administrators. And then we also have role-based access. So if you want, you can set up so specific users can use alerts versus other users who would only be able to use like dashboards and interactive analytics. I already covered exporting logs. You pretty much covered that data. But if you do want to manage the exports, you'll get an email notification. This was, I want to say 8.2, we added email notifications so you'll know when it's done and you don't have to sit there and watch the export, because if you're doing millions of logs, obviously that could take some time. You can also go in and you could cancel the export if you decided you no longer needed that information. All right, let's see.
Julie, do you have any slide that shows the traffic patterns, port requirements? I know there's ports.vmware.com, and that shows the different directions. The question specifically was related to, what needs open between Log Insight and vCenter.
443.
443. Okay. And then there's the link. I've got the link to the doc, to the 8.4 documentation.
For this log, it's 514. UDP and TCP, usually most people are using UDP, but usually we allow both. And then for the Log Insight agent, it's port 9000 or 9543 for SSL.
Perfect.
But if you want to actually configure, so if you want to add vCenters versus manually configuring, then you need 443 as well.
Thank you.
All right, so let's stop this. So I will give you this deck, which will have all the slides on administration, but we'll just get to the demo because I'm kind of running short on time and I want to make sure I get to all of the questions. You guys see that okay?
Yes.
Okay. All right, let me look back at these. Does a Log Insight license allow for multiple Log Insight clusters to be set up, or does it have to be a single cluster? If you wanted to, we have customers doing cross-site forwarding. So if you're forwarding from one Log Insight cluster to the other, there's no additional license required for that, because it's going to look like one source going from Log Insight to Log Insight. I'm not sure if that answers your question though. So if you're doing a forwarding for DR or redundancy, you don't need two sets of license for that. Is the process to export and import alerts different or the same as 4.8? You can't export. I don't think you can export as many events. I'm not positive on that. I would have to follow up. It's been a while since I dealt with 4.8. Webhooks, I'll show you as part of the administration. I'm not sure what you mean by templates. So Tad, if you want to expand on that. And then is the export function new in 8.4? The export function is not new. The export management, where you can actually stop an export and get notified via email, is part of 8.2. With 8.0, I believe everything has been the same. I should have done my little snippet, my little update on what we introduced at each time. I know 8.2, 3, and 4, but I don't believe it's significantly different in 8.0, but you may have been limited. It might have made you export. I'll have to follow up on that. I don't want to speculate too much.
Tad did expand on his question regarding webhook templates. I think the new 8.4 VROPs, where you can specify the payload content, you customize the fields for to send out alert to teams, et cetera. I think he's asking if.
Oh, sure. So if we go into administration, is it going to make me log in again? I think I may have timed out here. Oh, okay. So on the webhook configuration, the payloads that we have defined are specific to Slack. So we are giving recommendations on parameters that you can add. I do have something in the slide deck where you can also add messages. So it would be $ and then messages in here, and that will give you up to 10 sample log messages in your alert payload. But these are the parameters that you can configure. So hopefully that answers your question. We also have the details for PagerDuty. So, if I wanted to add additional information, I could just copy this. So for Slack, if I wanted to add an example messages, I would just copy that and update it so that this has, I need to add the comma back in here. And then I would just change this value to messages. And notice it's not listed on here. I actually put that detail on my blog, and it's part of the presentation that you can actually add that as a parameter. Otherwise, these are the available options. And if you're doing a custom webhook, you have to specify the payload. And as we build upon this, we are working on other integrations. So I know ServiceNow is a popular one that we have a feature request in for. So hopefully that will be in a coming release. I don't have a specific date for that. But if you are interested in integration with a specific application and you don't want to do custom, just let your TAM know and we can add that to the list. Let's see, so you guys were asking about how to tell if your cluster is sized inappropriately. So if we look at the statistics tab under System Monitor, it's going to show me how many events per second I'm ingesting per node. Max is 15,000 for the size that I've deployed. I do have large clusters, so I can see I'm within my range here. If I was doing a large and it was over 15,000, then I would probably want to increase it. Now, I have seen times where we're doing a lot of load gen or something, so we'll be generating more logs and it will go over 15,000 for a period of time, and that's okay. It's just we don't want sustained EPS at that level. A spike once in a while, but it can't continually operate at ingestion over the maximum for that node size. Okay. And then it also breaks out the details in administration on what types of events we're seeing. API events would be things coming from the Log Insight agent, or if we're forwarding to this from another Log Insight server, we would likely be using the ingestion API. And so that would also be reflected here. You can see the active queries. So like if you wanted to do some maintenance and you wanted to see if there was any activity during that time frame, you could come in here and see that. So there is a bug currently with active queries though. So this time spent, if you refresh the page, it just keeps going up. That is a bug that hopefully will be fixed in the 8.4.1 release, but just know that it's right initially, and then as the page gets refreshed, it adds on. I know somebody recently had reported that. All right, so if we just walk through the administration for the cluster, this is actually where you'd come in and upgrade the cluster. If you're upgrading a cluster, it's just going to be downloading the appropriate pack file. And as it runs through the upgrade, it's going to send you notifications via email whoever is the system administrator email address configured, you'll get notifications, hey, this node's complete, this node's complete, this node's complete, and it'll just roll through the upgrade. And this is also where you would download a support bundle. Typically, when we ask you for a support bundle, you'd want to do it on the complete cluster, but if you are having trouble with a specific node, you can specify the specific node. This is also where you can come add additional virtual IPs. Like I mentioned, if you wanted, say you had like your Cisco UCS environment sending logs and you wanted to tag those as such, you could send those to a specific IP address and then tag them as, UCS infrastructure or HP servers or something like that. We have access control through VIDM. If you're using VIDM, you're not going to see a user email address or user information show up here until the user has authenticated. So once they've logged into the platform, if I want to make changes to their permissions, once they've logged in, I can come in and I can adjust their permissions appropriately. And then we have data sets. So if you do have some sort of restrictions that you want to place, you can use filters for data sets. Again, these are only available for static fields and tags. Static fields would be an example if you're using a login site agent to send application logs. Those are going to come through here, but we cannot restrict based on the extracted fields. So if I wanted to set up a role, I could create a new role and then restrict that to that specific group. Again, if you want me to cover anything specific, I want to make sure I'm using your time wisely. So just go ahead and ask. But right now I'm just going to go through the administration options because we have quite a few new features around log management and so alerts, the way that we've changed this now is so that they're system owned. So if I want to enable this alert, I can enable it and I could just add my email address. I could also configure a webhook. We'll just go ahead and enable that. Now that I've enabled it, if somebody else comes in and they want to subscribe to this alert, I can just come in here and we would just append that name. And that way we're not recreating the alert. We also avoid that issue where we have somebody leave the company and then that alert gets removed. Yes, alerts can be sent to multiple emails. I don't want to start sending this alert necessarily to anyone else, but yes, you can separate the alerts and you just separate using a comma. Let's see, host is just going to show, it's not necessarily ESX host, this is all the host sending. So we have the login site agent installed on all of these. So these are going to show me the hosts that are sending to log insight, whether it's an ESX host, a physical server, or log insight agent. And agent configurations are really nice because if you have enabled auto update, like if I come in here and I have something set up for systemd and I want to make a configuration change to this file and I want to add additional tags or something, I can just centrally manage this so that if I push an update, it's actually going to push that to all users. I can also enable auto update. I disabled this for testing something, but I can enable auto update and that will also keep the agent version in sync. I actually turned it off because I was testing something on the old agent. So you'll notice I still have some on the old version, but if you have that enabled, it'll automatically update those to the latest version with no intervention. But you can create your own custom files if you wanted. You could create a new group and then you could add all of the values that you wanted. You could also add additional servers. If I want to send this to another syslog location, I can do that as well. Log management was the big update in this release. We added log masking. So here I have a number of examples for log masking. Again, this is to remove sensitive data from a log message. So if I wanted to, I could hide a specific IP address. I know there was one scenario where the customer had a FIPS area and they had some question about sending logs to Log Insight. So they wanted to mask the IP address. So you could do that. And then they named it so that they knew how to, reverse engineer and look up that IP address if needed on the back end, but they didn't want that to be available to everyone who could search the platform. So if I run this information in interactive analytics, I will get the details of the log messages that this would impact. So it's the host name matches that specific regex. And then if it matches that, it's going to actually mask that IP address. Let's do something a little bit. So you can also mask based on a positional field. And what that means is we're using a specific field name. We don't know what necessarily the pattern is going to be or anything. I just know like the user ID. I want to mask everything in that field. So this is the selector I would use. The selector always has the regular expression value enclosed in parentheses. So it's going to just .* would be anything present in that field, and we're just going to change that to removed ID. So I have one here where I'm actually wanting to mask a phone number. So I don't know where that phone number is going to appear in the log message, and I just want to mask that so it's not detailed. This is a regular expression for a phone number with dashes. So I've supplied that, and I don't care which log message it is. I want it to be on all log messages. So I'm going to apply that. It does take a minute to replicate that to all the nodes. So once I get through log management, we'll go back and do some verification to make sure that it's masking the field. We also have some log filtering options. Again, this is dropping log messages. When we drop a log message, it's gone. We're not going to get it anymore. So if you want to say, well, I want to see how many log messages I'm dropping, we currently don't record statistics on that because we're trying to lower the overhead and we're not doing any processing except saying, okay, if it matches this, then drop it. So, you obviously want to be sure that that's not relevant. So I was getting a log message that was very chatty, like millions of log messages that I was getting for VPXD, and it was informational only. So, this isn't very helpful. And if I go to the event types, it was like 3 million messages or something in a very short period of time. So what I wanted to do, so that's not enabled right now. So I'm going to, what I was using the filter was the application name. Sorry, let me go back. So this is the app name. If you're using interactive analytics, if you highlight these blue fields, it will give you the value of that field, and it will highlight it in the log message if it's present in the log message. So notice when I hover over host name, it's showing the data. And if I hover over app name, it's showing me the application. So I verified that I didn't need logs of these types. So I'm going to also enable that, and we'll do some validation checks at the end, but I'm going to drop that log. Another one that I like to drop sometimes are DNS lookup logs that I'm getting. So like if I could set up a message where, hey, if it's not an error message and it's a DNS log, I don't want it, and drop that as well. For log forwarding, we can set up a destination. It could be Splunk, or it could be another Log Insight instance. It's pretty common that we have a use case for forwarding to another data center. some customers, actually a lot of customers don't back up Log Insight. Instead, they have a redundant copy, either in the same data center or another data center. And so they can actually, in that case, use the ingestion API because that is Log Insight specific. So we use it for agents or forwarding between Log Insight clusters. And we just have some enhancements over syslog because it'll retain all of the original host IP information. And then we can add filters like I have for this Active Directory log and only specify specific hosts. This is what we do for SIM forwarding to Splunk. For example, we would filter only the security and audit logs using various criteria or text filters. There's not a whole lot new with index partitions, except now if you want to do log archival on a more granular level, you can use index partitions to do that. Previously, archival was just under the general configuration. It was either off or on. And we got a lot of feedback that, you know, only certain logs needed to be retained for a period of time. On an archive basis. So if I wanted to, I could archive these or specify to a specific location. And then if I wanted to archive multiple data partitions, I just ideally want a different path, store those in a different folder on NFS so I know which logs are which. So in this case, I need a log, I need my NSX logs, but they're not really useful after 3 days. So I don't want to use up additional storage space to retain those for 30 days, for example. So I'm only keeping those for 30 days. You'll notice here I have my retention set for 3 days, and it'll give me the details on the oldest log time so I can ensure that I'm adhering to that. Now there are cases where the oldest log time might not be exactly 3 days because we overwrite logs not log by log, but in 500 meg buckets. So until that bucket is overwritten, it will retain in there. So if you're doing setting a retention period and you have a lot of logs in the beginning, but then you don't have a lot of logs, that could make the time frame vary, if that makes sense. You're writing logs in those chunks, not individual messages. And it's not going to just purge logs. So if I quit ingesting logs with this app name, it's based on overwrite. So it's not going to delete anything. It's just overwriting them. So if there's nothing to overwrite, that data will sit there longer. This is important to note. You can have up to 4 index partitions, and then with the default, you'd have 5. So that is the limit right now. If you add a new index partition, you do need to restart the cluster node by node. But if you want to make modifications to an index partition, maybe I want to change my filter. Once it's set up, I can change the filter without any restart, or I can change the retention period, and that doesn't require a restart. In the future release, we hope to remove that requirement.
Hey, Julie, moving back to access control, there's a question regarding, I think it's essentially, can you manage permissions by guest OS? So they're asking, allow someone to see only the Windows logs or only Linux logs. So I see data sets, but I don't see a guest OS as being a criteria.
You could, if you're using the agent, which you would be doing in that case, you could add a tag to the log for Windows or Linux, and then you would be able to filter on that. So we're doing data sets. So if you had some sort of tag that would differentiate between the two, you could definitely do that. Like here we've got Kubernetes. I thought maybe there was. Yeah, so you would actually have to, we go back over to agents, you would have to tag a log. So So we would want to add a tag perhaps that says Linux for whichever Linux logs that we're ingesting, or tag by Windows, and then it would show up as a field in there. And then we could set up role-based access control for using a data set for that. But out of the box, no.
Thanks.
All right, let me just need to do something here. So under log management, we wanted to drop specific log messages. So let's see, we're doing this drop logs filter. I'm going to run this in interactive analytics since we've enabled it. So notice we're not getting results. If I expand that out, you'll see that in the time frame since I've disabled it, we're no longer seeing log messages for that. So it's effectively dropping those logs. And then we also had this log masking a phone number. So if I come back over here and I do I'll see the phone number is coming through and it's masked, and just to prove that it wasn't previously. Oops, I think I had it within the last 5 hours. Notice before these logs were coming in with that phone number field unmasked. So it's just some validation on our log management. Let's see. No questions in the Q&A. Does anyone have anything specifically they want me to show? We do have about 25 minutes left, so I would like to make sure that I just answer the things that maybe you haven't gotten out of the session yet. So. Exporting or creating a report. Oops, sorry, this is to cancel exports. So let's see. So if I wanted to add a filter, just looking for some specific vCenter logs. And I can filter out events that I'm not concerned with. What I'm trying to do is get it down to 20,000 so that I can show you that. Otherwise, we would need to export to NFS, and I don't have an NFS mount ready for this demo. So otherwise, I would show you that.
A follow-up question, Julie, that the same person submitted is really they're wondering about exporting a dashboard to a report in PDF or something like that.
No, you can't. I mean, you can print to PDF, but we don't have anything natively within the application. Mm-hmm. So, so you weren't talking about exporting logs, but basically, if I wanted to export the results, if, like I said, it's going to be to NFS. So let's just see. So if I wanted to export logs with a specific user ID or something, I can choose raw events or CSV or JSON, and I would just export that. And then I could send those specific log messages off to like a security team or something.
Mhm. Is there a 15 vCenter limit? Is that a hard limit?
No, you can go over that, but it's not officially supported at that point.
Mhm.
And it's 15 vCenters per node, not per cluster. Just want to make sure I make that clear.
Hmm.
And is that specific to the Vsphere integration feature, or is that like events total?
There's no hard limit on there, but when we QA the product, we have QA'd up to 15 vCenters per login site node. So if you had, 3 nodes, you could have 45 vCenters. Let's see, Tim asked a question, are there any methods to assure dashboard consistency between nodes? I'm not sure I understand that question, Tim. Let me hop over to another window. So if you're talking about log insight nodes, you should be going to the virtual IP to access it. So you shouldn't be necessarily accessing a specific log insight node to view that information. So I'm wondering if you have some, anyway, if you want to expand on that, Tim. I'm not sure if you mean a node being like you're trying to access the dashboards from a specific log insight node, because we wouldn't want to do that. We'd want to make sure we're always just connecting to the virtual IP. Patrick Schneider is asking, can the Fluentd agent be managed over login site? No, there's no management. When our customers are using the Fluentd agent, they are managing that in-house. So like if they have a grouping of servers and they need to update that file, they're using another automation tool to do that. After you installed all your nodes and set up integrated load balance, what's the first thing you should do? You can go ahead and enable any content packs that you are relevant to your environment. So I would come into content packs. By default, you're going to have Vsan, Vsphere, and VRops, and that's it. So if I want to add anything else, I can come in here. You don't need to have access to the internet from your login site node. This is actually just using my browser connectivity. So if I wanted to install any of those content packs, I can just click on it and click on install, and it'll actually give me all of the details. If there's specific things that I need to do to make it work, I can do that. Otherwise, if it doesn't have details, it's probably just a syslog configuration. And so you'd want to do that. And then once you have that done, you can just go ahead and configure your infrastructure to send to the virtual IP of your login site cluster. There's not a whole lot out of all of the products. I mean, login site's pretty easy to stand up. It's, just making sure that you have everything on the same subnet and powering everything up. It's very easy to join it to a cluster. I mean, I've built environments in like, as long as it took me to deploy virtual appliances, maybe a half an hour, and then I can have stuff logging to it. So that's pretty quick. So Tim, I think your issue might be a user issue if they're not connecting. They should just be connecting to the virtual IP of the cluster, and then that master node is going to send subqueries out to all the nodes. You should not be looking at dashboards on a specific node, right? if the master node is not up, you'll get inconsistencies in your dashboards. So that might be a support ticket because it sounds like you're having a problem there.
So I may have some input on that or a thought. I'm wondering, like in VROPS, if I have two VROPS clusters, for example, and I make a dashboard in one, I can export that dashboard and import it into a different VROPS instance and have those dashboards available. Is there a similar functionality for Log Insight? Like if I create a custom dashboard, can I export that and put it in a different Log Insight instance?
Gotcha. Yes. So that is under content packs. If you go under my content, I can choose to export the information. So I don't think I've really set anything up in here. So let me. Actually, let me just, so I can clone individual widgets and add them to a dashboard, or in this case, I'll just clone an entire dashboard. So then if I go back to content packs, I will actually have some content. Oh, maybe I just wasn't patient enough before. Anyway, so I can choose the specific dashboard that I wanted to export, and then I would just import this. It's going to create a VLCP file. So, oops. So I'd have to remove anything that I didn't want. And then I would need to label this. If you're doing it for, you could enter your company name for there. Anyways, I'm just going to get a VLCP file, and then I would just come and do community supported. And that's how we can import, oops, sorry. We'd import the content pack, and I would just choose that VLCP file.
Cool, thanks. And Tim, if that didn't answer your question, just please clarify in the Q&A.
Is there a content pack for PostgreSQL? Do not think so. No, we actually, to create a content pack, I know I said I would get into some of the customizations. Nico Garrett actually has a blog out there that's an integration on using vRealize and VROPS together, and he talks about field extractions for a Cassandra database. And so we don't have out of the box content, but if we had like log samples from that, you can easily create something. But I would check out Nico's blog. Let me, if you go to, I'm gonna actually show you something. Let's see, Pathfinder, VMware.com. Do you guys know about Pathfinder?
This is a great thing to talk about.
Yeah. We have a relatively new site that we are adding content for all of the various products. You do need to log in to view it, but we have an area called walkthroughs, and we've divided everything out into specific categories. So if I want to look for Log Insight, what? Did I click on the wrong thing? What am I missing here, guys?
I'm not catching what's wrong.
Oh, okay. It's classified as multi-cloud. Sorry about that. I just didn't scroll over. Anyway, so this has so it's just vRealize_overview to directly get there. So let me put this in the chat so people who want to check it out with me. So there are there's a bunch of information from level 100 to 300 content. So we have some overviews. I covered a similar overview to what we did today, but today I presented kind of the latest and greatest. But we also have links to blog articles, YouTube videos. So if I wanted to, I can click on this link, and this is actually the blog that Nico wrote. He is actually a TAM who did a take 2 with tech marketing. And so this kind of walks you through. So again, Cassandra does not have a content pack, and he kind of walks you through sending the Cassandra logs using FluentD, but then he also shows you how to extract different fields. And then he's classified those. And by extracting those fields, then we can create dashboards, alerts, etc., queries. So, you also want to make sure if there is a content pack you're looking for, and I can totally understand you don't want to do the legwork, just let your TAM know and we can add it to the development of other content packs.
Is there any kind of licensing for content packs?
No, every content pack for Log Insight is free. We do have, like, there's a Cloud Foundation VCF content pack that's available in the community marketplace that I can actually show you. That was actually developed by one of our PSO team members. So, you know, a lot of things, like if somebody has a specific content pack that they want to work through, sometimes I'll review logs and create something, and then I'll hand them the file. Anything that's relevant to people across the board, I'll start to upload those to our not solutions exchange, but our content exchange. So those are all at code.vmware.com. We don't have a ton of stuff out there yet though, but you will find this Cloud Foundation content pack out there. Set some dashboards for like SDDC manager and things like that.
Near the beginning, there was interest in talking about migrating from on-prem to cloud. Is this a good time to discuss that?
Yes, so let me stop sharing this. Just pulling up a visual. So 1 second, I should have had this opened already. Can you guys see that in presenter view okay? Or is
We do.
All right. All right, so in the migration kind of hybrid use case, since most of our customers probably need to retain logs like 30 days, we have a period of time where we would be forwarding logs from on-prem to the cloud or cloud to on-prem, actually, whichever way, but usually we would be doing, like if you started out with Log Insight Cloud and you had some sort of retention, where you would have the logs in both for some period of time, whatever your retention period is. We don't have like an export function for the actual log data itself. So we'd have some overlap there, and we could definitely work if your account team works with on the licensing side, so that there's nothing official as far as like billing, because obviously Log Insight Cloud is billed per ingestion. So it's per gigabyte, and you can do on demand or subscribe to 1 or 3 year contracts. But anyways, there would be a period of time where you would forward logs between the two, and it's really easy to just set up a login site endpoint and login site cloud to forward those logs back on-prem for whatever time frame you need to. And then as far as like the content packs, anything that we have out of the box, you would just enable on the cloud side. And then if there was anything custom you created, we have a migration method to import that content. So you would export the content that you needed in the cloud, and that would be a VLCP file. And then on the engineering side, we have a converter that would convert that over to the cloud version. And then we would import that into your instance in the cloud. So if you have any specific questions related to the migration, if you just want to let me know, there's the feature parity is pretty much equivalent between the two. There are some gaps as far as the archiving in on-prem. We're actually working at, so on the, sorry, in the cloud version, you can retain logs currently for 30 days. And then after that, you can archive them. We have had some requirements where we need logs for 60 days. So this year we will be releasing a like kind of a lower tier storage available so that people who need to retain their logs for a longer period of time will still have those searchable. They'll just be a lower tier storage. So it's the search might be a little bit slower. So if you're looking for something out a year, it's going to be slower, but you're still going to be able to view that data without re-ingesting it. So there's a lot of new features coming up, and we are iterating a little bit more quickly in the cloud just because we manage the upgrades. So we're releasing at least quarterly, but we do have release updates coming out in May. We just released KB correlation with log messages so that you'll be able to get details on how to remediate issues for error log messages. And then we're also coming out with a feature which is slated for around the June timeframe for something called live tail, where you can do similar to what you could do if you're live tailing a log file on Linux. For basically just having real time. So instead of 5 minutes, it's just showing you the logs as they come in. You do need a login site proxy to forward from on-prem to cloud. That proxy would typically be located in the same data center where your login site infrastructure is. Usually we do 1 proxy per data center to collect not only Vsphere logs, but any on-prem logs. And you can have multiple cloud proxies per data center as well. There's no limit to how many proxies that we can manage, and it's highly scalable. We have customers, you know, doing, I think we have a customer that's doing like 40 terabytes per day. So we can definitely scale that quite well. And then it's great for, you know, if you're using AWS or Amazon or Azure or VMC on AWS, we can collect all those logs as well. You don't need to know any special query language. It's very similar to what you're used to in on-prem. Interactive analytics is called Log Explorer in the cloud version, but it's all that you can extract fields, you can do group by, the charts and data are the same. So I would encourage, if you have the option to move to cloud, it's a lot less administrative overhead. And again, it typically has the features that we release more quickly. But if you ever do want me to do a follow-up on that, Andy, I'm happy to do that on the cloud specifically.
Perfect, thanks. I think that about wraps up our time, unless you had anything else, Julie, that you wanted to fit in here in the last minute or so.
No, just thanks for joining. I appreciate your time.
Yeah.
If you have any follow-up, let the team know, and I will get back to you.
I captured a couple notes regarding some people's comments, and I will get those to you. And we really do thank you for this great content. You gave us a lot of really practical information, and so I much appreciate it. As a reminder, there will be a recording of this session that your TAM can make available to you. And then next month, June 10th, we'll be talking about Vsphere 7 update too. So please do join us then. In the meantime, have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.